There is something among us, spreading through the air like a virus. Sometimes in crowds. Our loved ones. Rotting our brains and killing us slowly. If what they say is true, smartphones will be the end of us all.
So I think we can all agree that using our phones isn't exactly a flesh-eating disease that's going to take over our town and kill us all, right? But some of us might associate with how often we use our smartphone devices to addiction or uncontrollable impulses. Some of those ideas might stem from researchers within the past 5 to 10 years who have exaggerated ideas of addiction and psychological and physical effects of overusing our cell phones. Let me act out for you an exaggerated example of what seems to be occurring. Hello, I am a fake researcher, and today I will be interviewing people about how they feel about their cell phone usage. Are they addicted? I think so. Should I be able to take that data from these questionnaires and publish my own interpretations on it? Yeah, I think so. Would you say that you are addicted to your cell phone?
Yeah, I would definitely say I'm addicted to my phone.
Yeah, I would say that I use my phone too much.
I'm not really sure. I feel like addiction is a pretty serious term to use regarding my phone use. Now, if you're anything like me, you probably use your phone for different tasks and it's a tool for your daily life. But when we talk about the term addiction, we actually need to figure out what that actually means. The American Psychiatric Association publishes its addiction criteria in what is called the Diagnostics and Statistics Manual 5, which was published in 2013. In the DSM-5, there are 11 effects that an individual may experience whenever they are having an addiction to something, such as 1. Hazardous use. Social or interpersonal problems because of the use. Neglecting major roles because of your usage. Withdrawal. Tolerance. Using larger amounts, longer. Repeated attempts to try and quit. You spend a lot of time using. Physical or psychological problems related to the use. Giving up activities because of the use. And last, craving. So it's pretty easy to relate those addiction criteria to different aspects of how we use our phone, right? As we just saw. However, when we use the term addiction in regards to our cell phone usage, it undermines the severity of the term itself. I'd like to give you a little background on research that's been conducted on smartphone addiction within the past 10 years. So both of these research methods have their flaws, and after you hear a little bit about them, we can discuss what those flaws are and how future research should learn from these mistakes. First, we'll be discussing Roberts et al., who is the author of The Invisible Addiction in 2014. And the other is Se-Yoon Cha, the author of Smartphone Use and Smartphone Addiction in Middle School Students in Korea. So John Roberts studied undergraduate students in Texas. He based his research off of how much students were using certain applications on their phones. Roberts concluded that undergraduate students spend, on average, 9 hours a day on their cell phones. He decided to use his own addiction criteria and invented the Roberts-Manolis cell phone addiction scale. Roberts asked his participants arbitrary questions such as, I spend more and more time on my cell phone, or I find that my cell phone use is a problem. Roberts also concludes that the individual applications on the phone are what drives the cell phone addiction in an individual. These application usages vary between male and female, and he went on to say that females are more at risk than males are. Switching gears, the other research example that I would like to provide for you is the work of Se-Yoon Cha, who studied addiction tendencies in Korean adolescents. Cha determined that 30.9% of Korean teens are at risk of smartphone addiction by using what is called the Smartphone Addiction Proneness Scale. The most popular activities were internet, mobile messenger, and SNS. Cha tried to determine the intent of the user, such as stress or boredom. He also tried to correlate smartphone usage with psychological and physical problems. The most common self-reported psychological problems were anger, depression, and lethargy. The most common physical effects of cell phone overuse was neck pain, back pain, and eye irritation. Cha suggested that future research pay close attention to the specific functions in the phone and tried to find different genres of cell phone addiction among addicts. I don't know about you, but something seems off. I'd like to present the flaws within both of these individual research methodologies and let you be the judge of whether or not these things that we're about to talk about are permissible or not. So the number one issue with these research methodologies is that they're all based on self-report, in that they are relying on the integrity of each one of their individual participants. Yeah, bro, I think I spend 45 minutes a day on Facebook. Addicted, man. There must be a better way to collect data and measure addiction criteria within participants who are experiencing addiction to their cell phone. Another note on the list of flaws is how in the past 10 years, researchers have used a broad spectrum of different addiction criteria scales. Can you imagine the different kinds of conclusions that resulted based on different types of scales and different types of activities that measured different kinds of definitions to addiction to one's cell phone? Something seems off, right? It was Linda Fisher-Grote et al. In 2019 who reviewed 38 different smartphone addiction research articles. Among those 38 research articles, there were 19 different smartphone addiction criteria scales that were used. Why do they need so many? There needs to be some kind of standardization of addiction scales among all research being conducted in relation to smartphone addiction. Last, I would like to briefly discuss how researchers such as Cha attempt to correlate smartphone use to psychological and physical disorders. It is important to understand that in many instances, researchers are diagnosing these symptoms by self-reporting answers from their participants, once again relying on the accuracy of the perceived answers of their patients. I feel that you all will agree that the only permissible method to interpret these effects is to diagnose psychological and physical symptoms in a clinical setting by trained professionals only. In order to portray the significance of my argument, I would like to offer an analogy that we can all resonate with. Imagine we lived in a world where COVID tests did not exist. So in order to determine if you have COVID or not, you would have to self-report your symptoms to your doctor. This means that every time someone had the perception of a cough, a fever, or a runny nose, they would have to self-report those symptoms to their doctor in order to determine if they were positive or negative for COVID. Oh, I forgot to mention, each doctor has a different kind of criteria for diagnosing you with COVID. This hypothetical scenario would obviously result in higher reports of COVID cases. This scenario also allows you to see a real-world example of how people can begin to believe that they have a problem based on faulty data. Now, some of you may be thinking, can't excessive smartphone use trigger addictive levels of dopamine release? Well, first we must understand what dopamine is. Dopamine is our feel-good neurotransmitter that is released when we sense a stimulus followed by a reward. Excessive amounts of dopamine can cause our dopamine receptors to respond less to the release of dopamine. So, naturally, our body tells us to find a way to increase rewarding activity. There are two factors that cause the release of dopamine. That is, reward uncertainty and the experience of almost winning. The bells and whistles that function on our cell phone cause spikes of dopamine due to a perceived reward uncertainty. This causes us to subconsciously seek out those desired effects. Now, I understand what you might be thinking. Didn't you just explain the addictive behavior to my cell phone? I did. However, I'm suggesting that future research veer away from focusing on research on the cell phone as a whole. I believe we need to focus on the functions within the phone that mediate this type of behavior. Functions such as alarms, vibrations, and visual cues that we see on social media applications. Today, we highlighted a few key factors on the topic of smartphone addiction. We reviewed popular, peer-reviewed research studies from Se-Young Cha and John Roberts. There is significant evidence that suggests that the term addiction is being used too loosely in research. Tayana Panova once suggested that the term problematic may be a more appropriate term until addiction criteria is met. Research conclusions have become saturated with relying on the integrity of self-reporting questionnaire questions from their participants. This notion may be the causation for the increased and perceived addiction to smartphones. Additionally, there are too many standardizations for measuring behavioral addiction to cell phones, rather than abiding by specific guidelines. And last and certainly not least, The lack of accurate data collection and methodologies may discredit the validity of conclusions such as prevalence of smartphone addiction, psychological and physical disorders associated with smartphone use, and motives of abusive usage. As we move forward, I am suggesting that future researchers utilize the screen time tools that many modern-day cell phones have. We should move away from studying cell phone addiction as a whole and begin to understand the rewarding functions performed by our phones. Then we can begin to understand addiction as it relates to our cell phone usage by implementing a standardized scale that must be used in every research experiment. Lastly, I would like you to monitor your cell phone use and begin to understand what kinds of activities make you use it more often. And remember, you're probably not addicted to your cell phone. And now that we understand what addiction actually means, we can rationalize the use of our cell phones so that we don't accidentally undermine the severity of the term addiction. Thank you so much for watching, and take care.